Good evening, everyone. Buenas noches. And welcome. Welcome to the State Library and welcome to this Swinburne alumni event entitled The Future of Work. My name is Timothy Bennett and it is my pleasure to be guiding us through this evening. Before I begin, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay respect to their elders past and present and emerging as we are meeting on their traditional lands tonight. Also extend that same respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are with us tonight. As I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, my name's Tim, and let me tell you, I'm excited. I'm excited because you have all come out today, you've all heeded the call this evening, for different reasons, but ideally at the heart of it would be because you recognise that this, tonight, is a fantastic opportunity to be able to hear from one of Swinburne's experts on a topic that, frankly, would be relevant to anyone who's intending to work in the future. So unless you're like me, who's planning on moving to Yackandandah next week and never doing a day of work in my life, there will be something here for you this evening. Before I get into introducing myself briefly and the star of the show, I just want to do a quick, what I call housekeeping or air host duties. So in the very unlikely event that we all need to flee the building, there are an emergency exit directly behind you as you would have come in. There is also a cheeky one to my left, your right. In terms of bathrooms and facilities, if you head straight out, continue going straight, and that's where the bathrooms are. Phones. If you do have a live situation with a family member or a dog at home and you need to be present, that's fine, I understand, I've been there. If you don't, and I'm not going to warn you to put your phone on silent, what I do promise is if you don't and it rings, I'm going to answer it, and that's going to be fun for me. It's not going to be fun for you, because I'll take you to town. Lastly, as well, tonight is going to be filmed, so if you do miss something that Sean says or you want to look at myself again, that will be made available in the coming days. So, before I introduce the star of the show, as I said, my name's Tim. Just a brief bit on my Swinburne story. I always like being able to try and relate to the MC of an event. I basically, as a young man, just wanted to learn and travel, which I did. I then moved to Melbourne and studied at another institution, which I won't name, but I studied arts, dramatic arts performance, and business financial planning, which everyone used to tell me is an interesting combination. I wasn't really grabbed by that after the first year, so ended up making the switch to Swinburne. For a couple of reasons, a myriad of reasons. One, my cousins both studied there, and they're two of the most successful people I know. I also heard that everything at Swinburne had entrepreneurship embedded within it. Plus, it was half the transit compared to where I was studying, so it ticked a lot of boxes for me. And look, I'll be honest, I wasn't a high-achieving academic student by any stretch, but good golly, was I participating in every possible facet of campus life. I'd volunteer, I'd be at orientation, I'd be at open day. The international orientation welcomes I was always at, clubs, societies, sport. I played ultimate frisbee, for goodness sake. When studied my corporate finance and investment units in Paris, I was able to do a future leader study tour, so I was a living, breathing part of campus life. Luckily enough, as soon as I finished, I was offered a job at Swinburne International in the mobility team, which I'm going to be honest with you, that's a dream job. Half of my life was spent outbound mobility, so encouraging our students to go on international study experiences and promoting that. The other half, I was lucky enough to be an inbound recruitment man, so about 4 or 5 times a year I get to go overseas, paid, and basically promote the university, sell our experience to students to study all or part of their degree with us here in Melbourne. I was basically selling Swinburne, Melbourne and Australia, which if anyone knows how well I sell, that's a piece of cake. During that time, I was still living in my student's share house, believe it or not, and Matthew Box and Angus Sinclair and myself had a bunch of business ideas. Finally, in 2013, one clicked. So a humble body was created, and look, purely the business was started because we were so frustrated with why an incredibly renewable, sustainable resource, industrial hemp, was not being used to its full capacity. So our sole aim was creating more awareness about the many, many benefits and uses of industrial hemp. What we came to, after plenty of whiteboards in the shed, was skincare, believe it or not. If you told me a year ago, Tim, you're going to start a skincare label, I'd say, you're out of your mind. But we felt that that was the most relevant way that someone uses every day. They could experience really, really good benefits. And again, the barriers to entry to do a skincare label were better than being able to do a food product or a clothing or a building material. 5 years later, we work with hundreds of retailers here in Australia. We partner with Urban Outfitters in North America. We've helped hundreds, if not thousands of people with feeling more healthy and happy in the skin they're in. And we got our goal. We talked about hemp to as many people as we could, and it's now on the table. Actually, if anyone keeps track of it, this year it got legalised as a food good in Australia. And that's bloody 20 years behind schedule, but we're here in the end. Most recently, though, I've started Melbourne Pickle Co., which is a boutique food brand with a guy who's been working in fruit and veg for about a decade. Some people in the audience don't like pickles, that's fine. But we wanted to set out to be able to compete with the American companies that charge $20 for what's not a bad pickle, but it's come halfway across the world, and you can make an equally as tasty, low food mile pickle based here in Melbourne. And if anyone knows the prize draw tonight, there's a jar of the best pickles going around available. So I hope you put your business cards in. Lastly as well, and probably most passionately, I get to work as a consultant in presentation skills. I facilitate, I MC, I run workshops to basically help people to be able to present more effectively, to be more confident, be more comfortable, and to be more, I guess, effective in being able to articulate messages. And in relevance to what Sean talks about tonight, it's a skill that I believe is really valuable and very transferable. And I get real kicks out of seeing software engineers, CEOs, social enterprise gurus come through my workshops and come out the other side and be better equipped to articulate their messages they're trying to communicate. If anyone's been in a presentation that's been boring and disengaging, and even if it was a good message, it didn't get poorly communicated, I'm on your side. I'm waging war against those. So, it brings me to what is the best bit of the night and the reason that you're all here. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage Dr. Sean Gallagher. Just a little bit on him in case you weren't aware. Sean is the inaugural director at Swinburne's newly appointed Centre for the New Workforce. Sean has a PhD in chemistry studying fullerenes, and I had to Google fullerenes 2 weeks ago because I had no idea what it's about. Sean's worked in public affairs, politics, and public policy. Sean's also a chairman of, or was a chairman for the Australian Synchrotron, and he co-chaired for 2010, which is an LGBTIQA+ organisation aimed at supporting and offering services to young people. Sean returned to higher education to establish the US Study Centre at the University of Sydney. And tonight, Sean's going to talk to us about an issue that is probably one of the biggest ones facing us at the moment, where automation, AI and technology is increasingly taking over the role of people in a number of sectors and industries. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and join me to welcome the star of the show, Dr. Sean Gallagher.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. The challenge to be engaging is afoot. Vice-Chancellor, distinguished guests, Swinburne alumni, colleagues and friends, welcome. It's great to be here tonight. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. In my view, there's no greater challenge facing society today than workforce transformation arising from digital disruption. Sophisticated cognitive and automation technologies are going to impact all work and change all jobs. Swinburne University has taken the bold initiative of establishing the Centre for the New Workforce, of which I'm privileged to be its leader. The Centre has one mission above all others, and that is to ask the question, how can we make sure people are at the heart of the future of work? Tonight, I'm here to talk to you about three things. I want to introduce to you the digital revolution and go on a bit of an exploration. I want to talk to you about three emerging futures of work, and I want to ask the question and potentially try to answer it, how can we reach our peak human potential? In June 2012, my partner Owen and I took ourselves to Bali, away from the daily distraction of our life in Sydney. Before us, we had the most important decision of our life to make. You see, a few months before, we decided to start a family, and we'd recently engaged a surrogacy clinic in Delhi in India. The decision? We had to choose an egg donor. The clinic had given us 150 profiles of women from which we had to choose one to be the egg donor. Now, in India, egg donors have to remain anonymous, so you don't get a lot of information. We had an A4 page on every donor. There was a photo and just basic information: height, age, whether they had kids, level of education, and of course, their intention as to why they wanted to become an egg donor. And that was it. How do we decide? At first, our gut instinct was to use our gut instinct and to choose the woman with whom we liked the most. But then we thought maybe we should also do perhaps a dispassionate, objective analysis to figure out who should be our egg donor. Little did we know at the time that this dichotomy in decision-making is what Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for. He identified that humans have two ways of making decisions: System 1 and System 2. System 1 has evolved with us over time. It's fast, it's based on instinct, it's our gut reaction, it operates automatically, you can never turn it off, and it's full of bugs. System 2 is slow, it's deliberative, it's rational, objective, it's based on complex computations, and it requires a lot of effort. System 2 is why you go to university. It's why people go to Swinburne or any university, is to be better at making System 2 decisions based on critical analysis and rigorous frameworks based on data and objective analysis that come up with a decision. And System 2, of course, is what large corporations and organizations use all the time to make decisions. But the problem is that System 2 is always infected with System 1 thinking, often resulting in poor or wrong decisions. You see, System 1 is full of cognitive biases. At last count, there was over 175 of them. And a cognitive biases, for example, is, I'll give you three. Imagine if you have a whole avalanche of information in front of you and you're kind of getting bored. It's like, well, I'm just going to make an assessment or a judgment as to what I think all of that information is going to be. Or there are gaps in the information that you've got in front of you. It's like, well, I'm going to make an assumption as to what I think should be in those gaps to help me make the decision. Or I'm just getting too bored and I want to get to the end and make a decision immediately. All of those cognitive biases are operating all the time in an unconscious way in terms of how we make decisions. So the issue is that when decisions are left to CEOs of companies, is that they may have spent millions of dollars in some cases coming up with a decision. So research departments, they analytically, rigorously analyze all of the data to come up with a decision. And then it ends up on the CEO's desk to make a judgment call. Very often, those CEOs make the wrong or at least poor calls. So what's the best way to make decisions and predictions? Take the human out. Overwhelming evidence shows that data and algorithms alone are best at making decisions and making predictions, and are certainly much better than the judgment of what we're often referred to as expert humans. Where you can use data and algorithms to make a decision, you should. It's not always possible, of course. Data has a lot of bias built into it. We often have insufficient data to be able to to make a proper decision. And sometimes the problem isn't easily defined and therefore isn't easily codified. Humans, of course, are not redundant. We have two things that algorithms hopefully will never have. One is context and the other is common sense. See, when an algorithm takes in data, it takes in the data that we tell it to. When we take in data, here I'm looking at the audience, but I can also see the screens on the side and see what's happening up there with the lights. I take in everything. I take in the whole context. And that means that I and we all have common sense. A great example of where this is important happened in December 2014 in Sydney. The Linseed Cafe had just started, and thousands of Sydney-siders who worked in the CBD had heard about this on the radio or on the internet, and they all tried to get out of Sydney CBD ASAP. Many of them pulled out their phones, got onto Uber. Uber's algorithm said, whoa, there's a surge in demand. We're going to hike the price $200, $300, $400 to get an Uber ride out of the city. Now, common sense tells you that that's not the time to be invoking the surge charging. So what's the role of humans? To let data and algorithms make the decisions, but always make sure a human is there to review it. Back to Bali. We decided in the end to build a crude algorithm. After we ran the 150 profiles through this crude algorithm, we ended up with about 10 women we thought were perfectly viable egg donors to be, to help start our family. Only then did we let our System 1 thinking take its course, and we chose the woman that we liked the best out of those 10. And today, we're the very proud parents of Indigo. But it's also sad because many of our friends today who also wanted to start a family through a similar journey don't have a family today because they let System 1 thinking, they let their instinct and their gut reactions make the decisions along the way. AI is another way of saying a clever algorithm. So artificial intelligence is going to have a huge impact on work, and it already is. From journalism to auditing, from legal work to medical diagnosis, AI does a better job than humans. It's faster, it's cheaper, and it's more reliable. AI is perfect for well-defined problem spaces where decision-making can be codified, supported by lots of data. And of course, an AI is even getting better at less well-defined problem spaces. On the one hand, it's kind of sad to say that technology is taking jobs, and of course it is. Any of us who would lose a job to technology, that's not a great situation to be in. But on the other hand, shouldn't we be striving to get the best decisions possible? Now, when it comes to writing a sports journal article, it's a bit of a toss of a coin as to whether a human or an algorithm can actually write a better article. But where it comes to diagnosing cancer, if an algorithm and the data can more reliably predict whether a cancer diagnosis should be made much better than a human who has all of these cognitive biases, we need to go with the algorithm, not the human. So how can humans thrive in this future of work? Well, here my talk is structured in 3 parts. The first is understanding the digital revolution. The second is I want to introduce to you 3 emerging futures of work. And then lastly, I want to show you how learning is going to be the essential tool for all of us in these futures. I've never been to Africa. Maybe some of you have, but I expect that if I do, I'm going to come back with photos like this, photos of animals on the savannah. And after a 2-week immersion, I would have thought, yeah, that was pretty cool. If you then said to me, I want you to go and survive in the savannah, I said, whoa, I just had a 2-week immersion. This is not enough. I would need to understand the ecosystem, the environment, and the forces at play in order to not only survive, but eventually thrive in that situation. Devices and apps are kind of like the animals of the digital world. They demand attention, and we need to know about them. But knowing devices and apps by themselves doesn't give us a lot of insight into the digital world. We need to know about lions, and we certainly need to know about killer apps. But that doesn't mean to say that we know enough to thrive in that space. We need to better understand the ecosystem of the digital world and also the environment. Fortunately, unlike the African savannah, which has been around for tens of thousands of years, the digital world is still pretty nascent. It's still evolving, and we have the perfect time right now to immerse ourselves to better understand it. I want to take a look at some of the forces at play. These are the 3 most stunning facts of the digital revolution which are challenging our experience of being human and may even challenge our identity of being human. Moore's law, hyperconnectivity, and what I call going from verticals to horizontals. In 1965, a chap by the name of Gordon Moore, who'd previously started a company called Intel, you may have heard of it, designs and builds computer chips. He figured out after about 5 or 6 years that he was noticing a particular trend that every 18 months to 2 years, they were able to double the number of transistors on a single computer chip. And he made the prediction in 1965, you know what, I think we can continue this. And every 2 years that we're going to continue doubling, whether it's Intel or others, the number of transistors on a computer chip. Well, it was like a law of nature, because 50 years later, we have stayed absolutely dead true to that prediction. Every 2 years, we've been able to double the number of transistors on a computer chip. This is an exponential. Now, exponentials, they start slow. So it's kind of like the line down the bottom here. Where's the pointer? No, it's not going to work. So the curve at the bottom, so you can see how the exponential starts slow, whereas linear is at first much faster. The story that I like to tell to help us explain what an exponential is and the power of it was done by Brynjolfsson and McAfee in a book they wrote recently, The Second Machine Age. There are many stories out there. This is the one I like. That by 2020, so in 2 years' time, the advances in computing technology are going to equal everything since the beginning of the computer. In 2 years. We've got pretty sophisticated technology today. In 2 years' time, it's going to be twice as sophisticated. In 2022, twice again. That's extraordinary change that's happening on a scale that we're not used to as humans. Because historically, the rate of change of technology has been roughly equivalent to our ability to adapt to that change. You go through the Bronze Age or to the Steel Age, the Scientific Revolution, or even the Industrial Revolution. They occurred over generations. Sure, there was an initial period of disruption when the technologies came on, but then we figure it out and we start to master it, and all of a sudden, after a while, we then readjust and we sort of co-evolve technology and humans, one and the same. But this time it's different. We have a widening gap that is getting wider. In 2004, DARPA, which is a research agency in the United States, held a competition, $1 million, to an autonomous vehicle that could go 150 miles in the Mojave Desert. Well, they all lined up there at the start, about 100 of them or so. No car got more than 11 miles. Most of them crash burned, some didn't even make it to the starting line. It led to predictions back then by very eminent researchers saying, the autonomous vehicle, it's decades away. Yet, somehow, 5 years later, Google cars are driving the streets of California autonomously, clicking up millions of miles. We went from a period of disappointment of these new technologies to a period of, whoa, we're being completely disrupted here. What's gone on is not just an exponential in terms of computing. There's been a confluence of exponentials that have come together to ensure that the autonomous vehicle has become a reality. So everything from sensors and informatics and robotics and energy has come together in an exponential way to give us this solution. Some people call this brine. Biotech, robotics, informatics, nanotech, and energy. They all experience exponential changes. And in some cases, far more than what's experienced in computing. The second is, a stunning fact, is hyperconnectivity and the increased complexity. By 2020, 50 billion people and things are going to be connected. 50 billion. I mean, that's extraordinary. It's extraordinary complexity. I mean, if you go back to the 1800s, if you lived in a small town, you might have known 200 people. If you wanted to meet new people, you went to church on a Sunday, or potentially the dance that was put on once every few months to sort of expand your circle. But with Facebook, I mean, this wasn't even yesterday. This was 10 years ago when Facebook came on. I reconnected with some of my kids from high school, or from primary school, that I hadn't seen for 35, 40 years in Canada. I mean, that's kind of cool. But you can also do really utility stuff. You can engage a coder or a programmer in the Philippines overnight to deliver work back for you in terms of to help your startup get off the ground. You've never met these people. You're trusting digital platforms and the connections that are occurring. And that's extraordinary. But this isn't just a plaything. I came across this slide on LinkedIn the other day. I thought I had to screenshot it. The road to mediocrity is paved with in-house creative. What that means is the best talent and ideas are out there. It doesn't matter how good your organization is. It doesn't matter how amazing the talent you have. the best talent and ideas are out there. GE, they make jet engines. In 2014, they held a worldwide competition because the bracket that holds the engine to a plane, they thought weighed too much. It weighs 4 kilos, and they thought, we need to reduce the weight on this because, hey, reduced weight means less fuel, means happier airline customers. Now, they did their best internally, and they got it down to 4 kilos. And they thought, well, as a lark, let's see what's out there. You've put up $20,000, not a big amount of money. Well, the winner was this Indonesian guy, 21-year-old, not even an aeronautical engineer. He's just an engineer. He took 80% of the weight out of the bracket that tied the engine to the wing. 80%. Let's just put that in context for a second. GE has a bigger R&D budget than most countries. Yet internally, they could not come up with such an innovative solution as this. Hyperconnectivity means increasingly we must look to build our networks, to increase our connections in order to find the best talents and ideas wherever it is. Because if we don't, our competitors will. The third most stunning fact, or the third fact of the most stunning facts, I'm not sure how it goes, is how we're moving from vertically to horizontal. And let me start with vertically. You may have seen slides like this before. This is the automotive industry. It's a vertically integrated industry. It's one-dimensional. You can see upstream we have the supply chain, which is all of the bits and pieces that go into producing the car. In the middle we have the car manufacturer, the OEM, the Holdens, or not the Holdens anymore, the Fords or the Mercedes, they pull it all together, and then downstream is the distribution channel. Everywhere along the line, someone clips the ticket and all of a sudden the price is what you pay when it comes out of the car yard when you pick it up. Almost every company in that linear value chain is specialist in the car industry. As we know in Victoria here, everyone's trying to transfer their skills to elsewhere. We're now moving to a world that looks like this. This is a mobility cluster where value is created in a network, where technologies are coming together to create a solution. Uber is a great example. I was at a talk at a conference earlier this year, and this guy gave a pretty amazing factoid that Uber is a tech stack of 13 different technologies. And that you could, in an afternoon, create Uber by bringing in these various technologies around your idea. Now, the fellows who started Uber, they're not mobility experts. They just had an idea, and they pulled together the solution through technologies to help them drive that. Very few companies in this cluster are mobility specialists. This is the third most stunning stunning fact, and that's digital platforms creating rich ecosystems and rich clusters. Digital platforms, you might know everything from Facebook and Apple, but more broadly into enterprise platforms that companies use, and they increasingly integrate and overlap with each other, which means that we're moving towards a universe of ecosystems where industry borders are becoming porous and in fact are going to completely dissipate and break down. In this kind of world, which is increasingly emergent, everyone is your competitor or your collaborator or both. Behind all of this is data. Data drives everything. It is the commodity that is essential for the digital economy. By 2020, there's going to be 1 trillion sensors out there on the planet. 1 trillion. I don't know how many zeros it is. I think it's 12. For example, this General Electric Gen X engine, a pair of them. They each have 100 sensors on either of them. If they operate for a day, that produces 1 terabyte of data. That's just one thing. You can imagine how many sensors are out there. Of course, what this means is this enormous increase in data is going to make our algorithms and AI much, much smarter. These three most stunning facts mean that how work gets done in a digital world is going to change profoundly. With constant disruption, unlimited opportunity, and complex networks, in my view, the future of work is going to be flat, fast, and furious. Now let's take a look at the 3 emerging futures of work. Digital technologies are profoundly transforming the way we work and also the way we live. The iPhone only came out 10 years ago, and we wouldn't have ever predicted the impact it's had on us in that period of time. PwC has come out with what they call the Essential 8 digital technologies. Of course, they're not the Essential 8. I'm sure there are others. For example, big data is not in there. You might include it. And there might be other emerging technologies that may become essential in the next little while. But let's go with it. Many of these technologies, of course, have been around for decades. I mean, the Japanese have been playing with robots for 30 or 40 years. And AI, well, the theory behind that has been around since the 1950s. Why all of a sudden are they important? Well, it's Moore's law, exponentials. They've become so sophisticated, and bringing them together means that there are technology, that the combination of technologies means that we can make solutions that we hadn't dreamed of before. And of course, by 2020, it's going to be twice as sophisticated as it is now. These are the digital technologies that give rise to the devices and apps that so often attract our attention. This leads to the first future of work, digital transformation. It's how digital technologies are transforming the way we create value, such as Industry 4.0. This is technologies coming together to create a solution that didn't exist before. A couple of the leaders are companies that work very closely with Swinburne. Siemens and Asahi are very much at the forefront of Industry 4.0. Asahi has a production line where they're wanting to, they produce water bottles for Coles and Woolworths, and at the moment when the Coles batch finishes, a human has to come in and say, switch the button and say, no, you've finished as Coles, now you've got to put on the Woolworths label and away you go. Industry 4.0 will do that automatically because the product is actually talking to the production system saying, hey, I'm Coles, oh no, I'm Woolworths, and then the system reacts. This is Industry 4.0, and it's going to allow us to have much more bespoke outcomes than what we have currently. You would have had to have been living under a rock not to have seen this headline recently. Telstra to cut $1 billion and 8,000 jobs. This is what Andy Penn, the CEO, has done. I'm not here to comment on whether or not that was the right thing, but I do want to delve behind the reasoning behind the short-term business imperatives. Let me read to you what he says. We're creating a Telstra that is able to continue to lead the market. In the future, our workforce will be smaller, knowledge-based, one with a structure and a way of working that is agile enough to deal with rapid change. What he didn't say, and let me say it for him, is that their workforce may be smaller, but they're going to have more people working for them through freelance economy. And I'll talk about that in a second. Of course, it's not just Telstra, it's ANZ and NAB. They're the first ones, large companies that are going agile. But organizations are discussing agile everywhere. What does agile look like? Well, you probably recognize the structure on the left. That's how companies and organizations have looked for 200 years. Very hierarchical, bureaucratic, top-down, with rules-based and routine-driven, low risk, and trying to drive certain outcomes. All of the experts are stuck in silos, and that's what universities have been preparing students for 200 years. Agile is a much flatter structure where instead of the leadership driving managed outcomes all the way through, they just set the direction and then allow teams to figure out what are the best products or services that we can deliver to an even more bespoke part of our market segment that actually help us achieve the directions that the leadership is setting. In those teams, there's multidisciplinary, they're very fast acting, people working across discipline lines all the time. How do we prepare students and how do we prepare people for that future? This is the second future of work, organizational transformation. It's how organizations are restructuring themselves. It's not a technology solution, but it's because of technology. And the leaders in this space are certainly the banks and telecoms, but others will follow. This is possibly the most provocative, if not the most profound to many people, of the three futures of work. This was work done by a freelance company, Upwork, which has been working with some Stanford economists, so it's a pretty rigorous analysis. The white line is the direction of workers. The green line is the direction of freelancers. By 2027, the majority of US workers are going to be freelance. I'll say that again because it's worth saying. By 2027, there are going to be more people in the United States who are freelance than those who only have a job. That doesn't mean to say that everyone is freelancing and that's all they do. They may be having a 9-to-5 job and they're supplementing their income with freelancing, or potentially they could be doing freelance in between jobs. But the majority of US workers will in some capacity have freelance. That doesn't mean to say that they're all Uber and air taskers. There's an increasing number of high-level professionals in the freelance economy. Bridget Loudon, who's the CEO of the local digital platform, Expert 360, predicts, based on current trends, that by 2020, 40% of Australia's white-collar workforce will be freelancers. 40%. White-collar. They're the graduates of our universities. This is the third future of work. Platform transformation. How digital platforms are transforming work by disconnecting work from jobs. It might be nicer to say rather than gig or freelance, some people refer to it expertise as a service. And the leaders in this space are Upwork and Expert 360. These three futures of work, digital, organization, and platform transformation, they're not mutually exclusive. They're all working hand in hand with each other. One of the reactions I often get from people after talks like this, or when, in barbecue kind of conversations is, yeah, that's okay, but these technologies, they're not going to impact me, right? Well, it's not just major industries and large corporations that are going to be impacted by these disruptions. It's everyone. Who's heard of dark kitchens? Raise your hands. Yeah, a few of you. Who uses Uber Eats or Deliveroo or Foodoroo? Yeah, a lot more of you. Well, Uber Eats, they may be delivering your food, but they're getting a wealth of data on your eating habits. And so what they're doing is they're setting up industrial kitchens to disintermediate the restaurant industry. So, like, Sean, you like pepperoni pizza on a Friday night. I see you're prepared to pay $20 and you're prepared to wait 20 minutes. That's fantastic. How about I offer you a pepperoni pizza, extra pepperoni if you like, deliver it to you in 15 minutes for $15. That's a pretty good deal. I'll take that. And so they deliver it to me, and they have set up industrial kitchens at economies of scale to deliver these products, and they're disintermediating the restaurant industry. Who would have thought that the restaurant industry could be disrupted? So it's not just about the type of work being disrupted, it's how work is being organized that's being disrupted. General Standards is a legal firm that offers $4,000 flat rate for any startup wanting its legal costs to incorporate. That's it, $4,000, completely undercutting the legal firms. A different type of disruption is how Qantas and Uber are coming together. This is a new way of thinking. It's kind of like an integrated solution. Maybe another way to think of it is this way. You can imagine only in a few years' time that might have a meeting in Sydney next week on Wednesday on a 9 a.m. All I do is enter that detail into my diary, and behind the scene, they know the preferences in terms of the airlines I like, or the flight, the transfers and the hotels I like to stay in, potentially the restaurants as well. All of that is going to become increasingly integrated. So understanding connectivity and complexity is very important. But of course, there's a lot of opportunity out there. 99 Degrees Custom is a textile warehouse, or textile manufacturer, in Massachusetts. And they thought, textiles in the US, we're dead, we're cactus. But they adopted new digital technologies. They transformed their whole workforce and upskilled them. So what happens now? If you get a 3D scan of your body, you can send it to them, and they can send you whatever bespoke clothing you like, and they're doing exceptionally well. Zingy is this fellow, it's a dog walking business. A few years ago, he started a dog walking business in Los Angeles. He had a couple of dog walkers walking for him. He realized there was an extraordinary amount of demand for it. He set up an online platform. He now has more than 800 dog walkers working for him. He's never met, maybe 10% of them. And of course, our local hero in this sort of space is Melanie Perkins, who set up Canva. She had the brilliant idea of, why don't we just drag and drop graphics and pictures into a design template? Like, simple. She's worth more than $1 billion. She's one of our few unicorns. I now want to go into the third part of the talk, and that is how humans can thrive in this future of work. I want to read this to you because it stands as much today as it did when it was written by the OECD in 1996. Learning is the tool of individual and organizational advancement. This process of learning is more than just acquiring formal education. Learning by doing is paramount. That learning means it's both the know what and also the know how. It's the explicit knowledge that we get as well as the tacit knowledge. The way it's normally worked is that with respect to the tacit knowledge is that we work with the technology, we figure it out, and then all of a sudden it gets codified and it ends up in a textbook. That's the relationship between tacit and explicit knowledge. And historically, after a period of disruption with a new technology, that's generally how it's worked. But this time, there's a bit of a problem. Even if education steps up its advance, and it is, Swinburne University is doing an innovative work in transforming learning initiative. And it's really reimagining the way education can meet the needs of the future. But even if education steps up its advance, it's still going to fall exponentially behind the future of work for which it aims to prepare people. In my view, a new approach to old ways of learning is needed. Let me show you what this is graphically. The know what and the know how are both absolutely essential. The know what is the foundation upon which you can then use your know-how. And it's the know-how that we need to get to that edge of technology where those futures of work are emerging with that wavefront of technology. So to succeed, however, at these futures of work, know-how is becoming increasingly important in a relative sense as that gap is widening. We won't have the time to codify all of the tacit knowledge that we're learning at that wavefront of technology and put that into textbooks for people to learn. So we have to think of ways in which we can create environments in which we focus on developing our know-how. For example, how do we share this know-how? Well, a quick word from our sponsors tonight. The Centre for the New Workforce at Swinburne University aims to investigate how to empower people and organisations through learning in a technology-transforming world. The strategy I want for the centre is simple. I want to investigate futures of work where they are emerging in situ with industry partners, and then to design and implement the learning to succeed at work in these futures. This isn't a destination, this is an ongoing journey. As soon as we develop insights in industry, we'll apply them through the learning and cycle around. It's going to be fast-paced, iterative, and non-stop. The learning is both the know what and the know how. And we have to think of learning ecosystems. Just in the same way that we saw that mobility cluster, how do we start to think of learning clusters? Now back to our regular programming. This is the know what. This is the skills of the future. So McKinsey put out this report a couple of months ago, and it shows the change in demand for various skill types by 2030. You can the circle's a little bit hard to follow, but let's go with the bars above and below the line. You can see there's a significant diminution in the demand for physical and manual skills and basic cognitive skills between now and 2030. You can see a slight increase in the higher cognitive skills, like problem solving and critical analysis. We can see a much larger increase in social and emotional skills, such as creativity, ideation, and working with people, but a huge increase in technological skills, the digital skills required to succeed in these futures. Those last three I pithily call IQ, EQ, and DQ. But of course, it's not static, right? The half-life of skills is getting shorter, yet our careers are getting longer. So we're going to have to continuously learn. The half-life of a learned skill, according to Deloitte, is down to 5 years. But if you're a software engineer, it's down to 12 or 18 months. The digital skills especially have a half-life that is diminishing even as we speak. We need to move to a way of continuously learning. This is the know-how, the learning by doing. There's a few words on that slide, I apologize for that, but let me go through it in a summary way. We have to get to the wavefront of where technology is changing, where it's happening, where those emerging futures of work, however they're defined, are actually, where they're taking place. And to immerse yourself and to immerse your company. Most importantly, it's about being creative, about taking risks and experimenting, building resilience, becoming a work maker, not a work seeker, and of course, to never stop being curious. Tonight has been a bit of an avalanche of new ideas and information, so I want to give you a very simple take-home message with you. In my view, to succeed at the future of work, we need two things. We need to continuously learn new skills and expertise. That could be from everything just dipping into a MOOC here or there to coming back to some more formal education to whatever form formal education is going to take on there or whatever type of education. We need to continue building our cognitive base upon which we can then build our, turn that into productive behavior. But we also need to continuously experiment with technology. The reason I say that is because we hear about technology as if technology is driving us. It has to be a symbiotic relationship. So to realize our peak human potential, it's not just allowing technology to push us as humans to new heights, it also has to be about people pushing the limits of technology. It has to be both give and take. I read several books in preparation for tonight. If you want to take a photo, I'll hold the screen up for a moment. Machine Platform Crowd by McAfee and Brynjolfsson, The Origin of Wealth by Eric Beinhocker, Digital Darwinism by Tom Goodwin, and one of my favorites, Tom Friedman, in the book Thank You for Being Late, which is an optimist's guide to thriving in the age of accelerations. In closing, I'd like to finish with an insight from Tom Friedman about the inexorable advance of technology being a reality that we cannot ignore. Whatever can be done will be done. The only question is, will it be done by you or to you? But it will be done. I've enjoyed very much being here tonight. I hope you have too. Thank you.
Dr. Sean. Thanks very much, Dr. Sean Gallagher. You've got a lot of marks from me in terms of engagement. I don't think I've ever heard the digital world be compared to zebras on the savannah, so you got a lot of points. There's a lot to take, particularly from my experience at Swinburne too, the know what but the know how. I think one of the reasons I chose to come to Swinny was to be able to get that application, get the actually runs on the board to apply the knowledge in classroom. So a lot to take. And one other point that I had to get in, there was an acronym you used. I run a pickle company, and what goes in pickle jars is brine. And you used an acronym of brine, so I think it was meant to be, ladies and gentlemen. We do, as I didn't mention previously, we do have an opportunity now, about 10-15 minutes, to be able to ask Sean any questions. I know I've got a couple of roaming mics. 2 rules when I do question time. One is please wait to you so everyone can hear and so that Sean can obviously hear the question. Second one, like Tony Jones, I accept questions, not comments. And please do start with your name and your role, and then you're more than welcome to ask Sean anything that you'd like to question him on. So I know I've got 2 mics on my right and left. Is there anyone who would like to ask Sean a question? You were in the middle, sir. You were front off the bat. Well done. Oh, sorry, just behind the man in the black. So the nice checkered shirt. That's you, sir.
Hello. Oh, it is on. Yeah.
Hello.
Brian Kidd from Swinburne. That's Brian, not B-R-I-N-E. I was interested in. I do a lot of work in this space around helping students work with this sort of the world of future work, and I'm interested in what you think the the emotional experience is going to be of being able to work in this sort of environment?
At PAVE, so Swinburne University, as some of you probably know, but it's worth reiterating, is that it's a dual sector institution, and my centre is actually constituted in vocational education, which is kind of unusual for a research centre. I've been working with the executive in PAVE to look at how do we immerse students into co-working spaces. And I see co-working spaces as being a portal onto the freelance economy. And of course, there are absolutely just concerns about the being lonely as a freelancer and always having to figure out how to get jobs. But these co-working spaces are wonderfully organic social structures in which that the success of the whole is actually important to ensure the success of the individual organizations. We went into one co-working space, and the guy was very articulate. They all talk about community, but he spoke about it in a very sophisticated way. He said that, everyone here knows that we have to form a community here, and it has to be a self-supporting social structure, so that if any business or company has a problem to solve, they know that they can rely on everyone that's here. And he came up with the idea, why don't we take a bunch of students who may be doing a project for one of the members in the co-working space and immerse them into that space, but not give them everything they need to know, but tell them, someone out there has the information or the skills that you need. Go find them. To give them an understanding that EQ is incredibly important. And of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a physical space. It also is in the digital realm as well. Emotional skills are very important. I think that certainly one of the things that the centre will focus on is not just how technology is developing and how humans can adapt to it, but also the impact on what it is.
Oh, madam, front and centre.
Hi, Sean, thank you. Helena from Faculty of Business and Law, and I'm a PhD. I'm doing adaptability careers. So what would your advice be for a transitioning employee? So, for example, you mentioned the Telstra, the 8000, and you talked about fast, flat and furious, and I think that's exactly right. So those middle managers that are being just cut out of that organisation, Sean, and that's exactly what's going to happen. They've identified that. So for the first time ever, the CEO said it's middle management and executive positions that are going. So what advice would you have for those employees who are trying to transition?
They have a rapid learning curve ahead of them, that's for sure. And, I don't mean to be lighthearted. It's a very serious situation for them. Freelance is obviously going to be a way, certainly in the short term, in which that they can find work. This expertise as a service. And it may even start off as driving for Uber, right?
I can just see it now.
Partly because it's what was the fellow that I read recently that he wanted to start up a venture that was in competition to Uber. It didn't matter, but he took himself into Uber to drive for Uber because he wanted to understand how the platform worked, how the system worked, and how all of the technology behind it. It really goes, and of course I can't speak for individual situations, but in a general sense, I think people need to immerse themselves in these new opportunities and not to be afraid of it. I think the challenge, of course, is that our society, if you remember that bureaucratic structure, it has forced us to be passive and reactive in a lot of ways, but the new world of work requires us to be proactive and on the front foot and make opportunities for ourselves. There's going to be an enormous change for those people. I suspect, what's my advice? Probably start off small bites, with Uber or whatever it might be, but also starting to build networks, starting to build connections. If you're this is a very university example. I mean, if you're an academic, right, and you're the third named author out of 10 authors on a paper, right, that's important, right? But how do you sort of get above the fray to be recognized? You need to be on LinkedIn or ResearchGate, and you need to be making those connections to say, this is what I bring, not just, reporting, your research outcomes. In the same kind of way that all of those middle managers, they need to develop their networks in a way that it starts to create connections for them.
Hi, my name's Jet. I was invited by my partner. Thank you for the great speech today. I found it quite enlightening. What I wanted to get your thoughts on was, as we transition, what are your thoughts on the rate of unemployment as we transition? Around 10% of the world get their jobs from driving vehicles, either taxi drivers or delivery drivers. We have people working in fast food and we have people working in retail who are likely going to lose their jobs in the coming decades. I mean, freelance jobs will be created, as you say. I mean, that's a possible future. But what is your idea? What I'm getting at is, what are your thoughts on a world where there won't be enough work for everyone? And my second question was whether you had any thoughts on the proposition of universal basic income as we transition into this economy.
Let me unpick your first question a little bit. Let me go through, is there actually going to, there were two parts to your first question. One was, what do the people that look like they're going to lose their jobs, what do they need to do? And the second part is, well, why should they do that anyway if there's not going to be enough work? I don't agree with the premise of your question in the sense that if you go back to the turn of not the most recent century, but the one before that, I mean, the horse industry was enormous in the United States. It employed 670,000 people, either picking up poop or tendering horses or, or horse drivers. There was an enormous industry around horses. When the automotive car came in, they thought, I'm going to lose my job. And they were right. They did lose their job. And the automotive industry didn't re-employ 670,000 people. It was around about 100,000 people. But what the automotive industry did was that, we now have reliable, safe transport that can go long distances. And all of a sudden, the motel industry and the fast food industry and road building and the transition from horses to cars, there was, in the first order effect, a loss of jobs. The second order of effect, it made 10 times as many jobs. The question is, we don't know what the future of work is going to be, but certainly every disruption that has occurred up until now, there has been more work. I go back to the African savannah kind of to answer your first question. We're not being plonked into a well-defined ecosystem that we're sort of like alien to it. We can actually go on a journey. And if I was a truck driver and I could see that, this technology is getting better, I've got to start learning and I've got to start making connections and just see what comes of that. It's no more difficult or clear as that.
That second component of the question, that was the basic universal income you mentioned.
Oh, so UBI?
Do you want to touch on that too?
Well, no, I think that, let me talk some data. I think the first randomized control trial I think they had was a little bit disappointing on UBI. Look, I think there's some talk in the United States about negative tax that might have slightly more advantages to UBI. Look, the jury is still a long way out on this, and I'm not sure that we need to think of those solutions right now. I think, perhaps another alternative might be what Singapore does. Singapore has an education fund for everyone. So if you live in Singapore, you get $500 every year in your bank account to spend on education, and it accumulates. So, in other words, would that be perhaps a better way of ensuring that rather than just providing a basic income, that perhaps we're also helping people to lift themselves to a higher level?
That is, I'm sorry, sir, I think I've just received the cutthroat. We're actually done now. But thank you to the roving mics. And importantly, Sean, I think probably the most refreshing thing for me is I think people is at the heart. From what I took a lot from that, but the people will be still at the heart with that common sense element as well. So that's quite a refreshing and a positive take that I didn't expect that tonight. But ladies and gentlemen, if you would join me in thanking Dr. Sean Gallagher.